Over 72% of homicides in California involve guns. That's more than 2 times of all the other mechanisms combined. And there were more firearm-related deaths than opioid overdoses in our state in 2017. Health experts now understand that the impact of gun violence is not limited to just the individual who is injured or killed. It impacts the health of witnesses, families, and friends, the entire community. While many of us may be aware that witnessing or experience violence increases the risk of mental health issues such as depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, sleep and eating disorders, and suicide attempts, it's important to know that exposure to violence also increases the risk for chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, lung disease, diabetes, as well as infectious diseases such as HIV. Exposure to gun violence can cause the body's natural stress response, the fight or flight response, to become overactive, leading to a condition known as the toxic stress response, which affects the functioning of the brain, immune system, hormonal systems, and leads to increased risk of infection and chronic disease. The greater the adversity a person has faced in their lifetime, especially during the critical developmental periods of early childhood, the more vulnerable their brains and bodies are to the harmful effects of violence. In fact, we now recognize that childhood adversity is a significant risk factor, not only for becoming a victim of violence, but for being a perpetrator as well. And California has taken bold strides to invest in prevention. In January of 2020, we will be implementing routine screening for adverse childhood experiences for all children and adults on Medicaid so that we can do the early detection and early intervention that gets to the root of the root cause. And the governor has included $40 million in this year's budget to pay providers to screen for trauma and understand how to respond with trauma-informed care. At the same time, the steps we take today to reduce gun violence will reduce trauma and toxic stress in our communities. Reducing the rate of gun violence in our state is a public health priority. This is an issue that impacts the health and well-being of all Californians, our families, our neighbors, coworkers, schools, and communities. The consequences of violence are costly and significantly influence health, mental health, educational, and social outcomes throughout life. As California's Surgeon General, I am committed to marshaling the insights and energy of medical professionals, scientists, public health experts, public servants, and everyday Californians to solve our most pressing public health challenges. Now is the time for prevention so that we can change the odds and transform outcomes for the next generation of Californians. It's now my pleasure to introduce former state's President Pro Tem, Kevin De Leon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harris. Buenos dias. Good morning. It is a privilege to be here with Governor Gavin Newsom, Robin Thomas, Amanda Wilcox, our Surgeon General, Dr. Harris, and of course, our Attorney General, Javier Becerra, to celebrate the implementation of California's absolutely historic gun safety initiative. In this nation, even in our very own state, gun violence has reached epidemic proportions. Every day, an average of 100 individuals nationwide are killed and hundreds are injured or wounded by a gun. Every year, some 1,700 teens, our own children, die by gun homicide. Too many parents are being forced to bury their children, and too many children have to grow up without their parents, all because Republicans in Washington, D.C. have failed to muster the courage of their convictions to pass sensible gun control measures at the national level. So we push for the strictest, toughest gun safety measures in the nation in hopes that other states would follow in our footsteps. We act because we have no other choice. We act because our children are dying in the streets and behind closed doors. In 2007, right around the time when I was elected, I remember there was a young girl, I should say 2006, Churupa Wungswisteri, who lived in Angelino Heights, adjacent to Echo Park. This was a beautiful little 9-year-old Thai girl, a Thai immigrant girl. She was in the kitchen playing with her mother, jumping up and down like a rambunctious little child, and all of a sudden she fell to the ground. Her mother was washing dishes and didn't realize that Churupa was just shot by bullets that hit her temple. Churupa passed away just a few weeks right before Christmas of 2006. Every year I spent here in the legislature, I worked hard on this issue with my colleagues in the Assembly, in the Senate, and with then Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, now Governor of the great state of California. And in those years together, we passed common sense solutions, restricting access to military-grade weapons, banning the sale of high-capacity magazines, cracking down on untraceable ghost guns. Any product that has the ability to kill and maim a human being, disfigure and paralyze them, should not be sold without regulation. That includes, obviously, ammunition. We already regulate the sale of firearms, and as the doctor just mentioned a few moments ago, the vast majority of murders that take place in California and throughout the nation are caused by handguns, not AR-15s or Kalashnikovs, but they're done by handguns. We even regulate the sale of cars, alcohol, tobacco, even vapes, and cannabis. But none of those items are expressly designed to kill or maim a human being. Ammunition is the oxygen that fuels the violence we see in our communities every single day. And our law enforcement needs to know who's buying it. Our law enforcement needs to know who's selling it. The background system we put in place with Proposition 63, along with the efforts of the legislature, will close this massive loophole once and for all, without the burden on those who buy ammunition, because the system we put in place with the governor will run background checks instantaneously at the point of sale. It is really amazing that such common sense, this is such a common sense logical step to screen people who want to buy ammunition, and can seem like such a large political lift. But California never backs away from a challenge. We always move forward. I want to give a very special thank you and a recognition to our governor, who had the leadership and the courage of his convictions to lay it on the line when he moved forward Prop 63. I want to thank also to and recognize Attorney General Javier Becerra. We worked on these issues since Arnold Schwarzenegger to Jerry Brown, but this chapter is finally closed with the leadership of Gavin Newsom, who's finally making this move forward. And I want to thank you very much, Governor. I want to also give a special recognition to then Attorney General Kamala Harris, because we worked very closely with both of them as well. We will keep moving forward, and I thank the leadership of our Governor and Attorney General. With that, it is with great pleasure that I bring up my congressman for the past 25 years, former leader of the Congressional Democratic delegation, and our Attorney General, Javier Becerra.
Senator, thank you for that reminder, although I'm very happy to be where I am right now. I think it is crucial to be standing here with all these leaders who have made gun violence prevention a priority. When things get done, it doesn't just happen. It happens because people propel them forward. And certainly Gavin Newsom, before he became governor, understood the importance of propelling this issue forward. And now as Governor Newsom, he is continuing to show leadership. But along with the governor, it is all the folks that have already spoken that have made it possible, because for years we've tried. Remember that in Congress, they're still trying to enact a measure that would let us check people who were trying to purchase weapons. California passed that law in 1993. And so you begin to realize how important it is to stand here with the folks that are behind me. These things don't just happen. It takes real leadership, and I thank each and every one of them for what they've done. You don't need to look too far to see how violence from guns affects all of us. As Senator De Leon mentioned, and if today is an average day, as of the beginning of this press conference at 9:30, some 38 Americans will have already died as a result of gun violence. And more than that will have already been injured by guns just by 9:30 a.m. on June 25th. 2019. Gun violence devastates not just our communities, it devastates our homes. It devastates our schools. It devastates our workplace. There is no question that we needed to take action. There is no question that we had to propel Prop 63. We've seen what requiring background checks for guns does. It works. If we hadn't been doing this, millions of purchases would have been accomplished. That should not have been. In the time that we have been checking for weapons through this universal background check in California, we have had some 230 million checks. More than 1 million checks have resulted in the denial of the purchase or transfer of a weapon. That's good news and bad news. Good news that less than 1% of those checks have resulted in denial. Bad news in that the ones that have resulted in denial constitute more than 1 million people trying to purchase a weapon when they shouldn't have their hands on it. There are still ways for convicted felons, those who are dangerously mentally ill and who commit domestic violence against our loved ones, can work around the system. They can still buy guns illegally. They can still try to assemble and manufacture their own weapons, known as ghost guns, with unregulated precursor parts. Or they can illegally use guns which they purchased before becoming prohibited individuals. Until now, those people could buy bullets and put those guns to use, no questions asked. Prop 63 will help close this loophole and prevent ammunition from getting into the wrong hands and being put into the wrong guns. Prop 63 also gives courts and probation officers the opportunity to disarm persons who are prohibited due to their convictions at the time of their conviction, not once we have to go chase them throughout the state of California and find them. With these new laws for acquiring ammunition going into effect on July 1st, all purchases and transfers of ammunition will be subject to a background check and authorization from the California Department of Justice. That will allow our team to prevent the sale of ammunition to those who have no business having it. The reality is, if we're only monitoring gun sales, we're only looking at part of the problem and part of the equation. We're missing crucial opportunities to prevent gun violence in all of our communities unless we take action. And so July 1st is upon us. With these new laws, we'll be able to take a look at the full picture. And with the help of Prop 63 and the champions that help make Prop 63 possible, we'll keep our community safer. The California Department of Justice is ready to do its part in regulating and enforcing. Prop 63 gives us those tools. We intend to move forward. This is California. We are the leader. We don't look back. We don't backslide. July 1st, we'll be ready to go. With that, let me introduce the person who propelled Prop 63 and now our governor who continues to work on this issue, Governor Gavin Newsom.
Well, everything that could be said or should have been said has been said, but I guess not by everybody. So I am your last speaker, but I want to compliment everything. Everybody that stood up, everything that was said, for their framing, for their advocacy, for their leadership that goes back years and years. I can brag on Robin Thomas and the work that they're doing at the Law Center. They have been extraordinary leaders in this space. They have provided enormous support for legislative leaders like former Pro Tem Kevin DeLeon, who was one of our national leaders in this space that had been at this issue of ammunition for years and years, who demonstrably delivered on gun safety and positioned California as a national leader. I think in the spirit of the Attorney General, you can quote Pericles. Forget he was a former mayor of Athens. And he said to the Athenians, says, "We do not imitate, for we are a model to others." In so many ways, on the issue of gun safety from 1993 forward, California has led. We have seen as a consequence of that a significant decline in the gun murder rate in this state that goes well beyond the trend line nationally. Gun safety laws save lives. The extreme rhetoric on the other side that works against basic common sense has to be called out for what it is. The extreme rhetoric on the other side that denies simple background checks has to be called out. California has done that on guns, but at the end of the day, it is a perverse fact. Guns don't kill people. Unless gun is used as a blunt instrument, a gun is not particularly dangerous. A gun requires a dangerous component, and that's ammunition. It is rather curious why we advocate background checks on guns, but then we limit any consideration, at least nationally, to that dangerous component, ammunition. You walk into a Walgreens or CVS or a Rite Aid and you try to buy Sudafed, you got to provide some information. Right now, at this moment, as we speak, you can buy unlimited rounds of ammunition on your smartphone. Have it delivered to your doorstep the next day. You can be in a possession, as it was suggested, of a legal firearm that you may have assembled, or legal firearm that you got from a friend or family member, or found or purchased illegally, and you can buy legally unlimited rounds of ammunition with no questions asked. On Monday, that changes. California will become the first state in this country to require point-of-sale background checks on ammunition purchases. And that's a point of pride, and that should be a point of pride for every Californian. This does not deny people their right to purchase ammunition. Quite the contrary. It basically codifies what we're already doing for guns and makes it a similar process for ammunition at point of sale. And because of Senator De Leon's leadership and the codification of some of the rules that they had advanced to the legislature and what we were trying to do with Prop 63, the senator led an effort to actually streamline and make more efficient and effective these provisions starting on July 1st. So we're proud of that. We're not, however, proud of the National Rifle Association for holding in abeyance another component of Prop 63, and that's our effort to ban large capacity magazine clips, which is a common denominator in so many of these mass shootings. That's held up now in the courts, and we're waiting for adjudication in the Ninth Circuit. We are proud that the state is leading on relinquishment. A big issue that you've all written about, talked about, is this issue of backlogs and the challenge that we all have, the burden that's placed on the Attorney General's office, Department of Justice, to go after those that are in possession of illegal firearms that are on our prohibited purchasers list. We know who they are, but it's difficult to go back, to claw back and go after that backlog. What we're doing in the state, first state in the country, at adjudication, there's a relinquishment process, so going forward at least, we'll mitigate that backlog. No other state in the country, by the way, is doing that. We had done that in domestic violence. Now we're doing that for all felonies. That went into effect. Lost and stolen guns, to address the issue of gun trafficking, that went into effect, another component of Prop 63. But none of this is easy. It's stubborn. On the ammunition side, they're attempting to stop us, but we're ready to go on July 1st. For those that feel, well, there's been no notification, this passed in 2016. You had all of 2017, all of 2018. I believe we're in 2019. And I don't know a gun dealer that's not familiar with this, who's not educated, folks, because I've heard plenty of stories of what folks are saying about what we're doing. And so I anticipate everybody is familiar with this. If they're not, they're about to be. I don't mean to be punitive in that respect. I don't mean to be, negative in that respect. But I've heard some are concerned about notification. This passed in 2016, and so I think, to be fair, we've had plenty of lead time on this for the implementation and the application of these rules and provisions. As it relates to the Department of Justice, more resources were provided this year. I know it's still not enough. On the issue of prevention, more resources were put in the CalVIP program than in the past. I think we, Robin, close to tripled. More than tripled the CalVIP funding, which is not insignificant. And I want to applaud the legislature, Buffy Wicks and others, for their leadership and advocacy on that as well. Look, we good enough never is in this space. I'll close. We've got to continue to be vigilant. We got to continue to lead. We got to lead by example. And that's what California does. That's what we're doing. And we're building on the incredible leadership. And that's why we invited him, of Senator De Leon, who deserved to be here. And I just want to compliment him and, as you suggested, your colleagues over the course of the last decade that have truly delivered. So thank you all for being here, and we're here in this capacity to answer any questions on this topic. And out of this topic, I'll spare everyone behind me and let them go. So if we can just focus on this, and then you'll get to any other questions.
Governor, on this very topic, we just suffered a tragedy last week with the killing of a Sacramento police officer. The individual involved is accused of having illegal weapons in his possession. So if Prop 63 were in effect, would it have made any difference in that outcome?
Yeah, all of this is cumulative. All of this is in the aggregate. Just because in one particular instance, when you look back, something doesn't solve a problem, we have to look into the details and see if there's areas where we can improve our regulations. But it's not about this specific initiative. This specific initiative will, I think, advance not only the principles and spirit of the principle and spirit that the state has always advanced, but I think significantly will save lives going forward. But in this particular case, it's difficult to pinpoint what specifically this would have done. I don't know enough of the details.
Governor, along the lines following Mike's question, do you think the state needs to do more in terms of dealing with people who have been accused and convicted of domestic violence? I mean, this man who shot the police officer had run-ins with the law before, and I believe
Well, the laws are crystal clear on domestic violence, and as it relates to restraining orders, as it relates to the rights. I mean, Robin, you guys have been legendary in the DV space as it relates to gun safety laws. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about what you guys have been advocating, what you've actually done in the state.
Well, I think one of the things that was mentioned was, excuse me, the relinquishment aspects of Prop 63, which really intends to do a better job of not just utilizing the apps database to go back and get guns back from people who shouldn't have them, but also making sure that we get guns from people at the moment that they become prohibited. So we do have records in California of who has guns, and there's a way in which we can make sure that we get those guns back, especially because we have universal background checks here. So, you know, it's much harder to get guns through that illegal flow than it is in other places. The one other thing I'll mention is a law here in California called the Gun Violence Restraining Order. It's sometimes called an ERPO law, or Extreme Risk Protective Order, and these laws have passed in 13 states in the last 4 years, following California's passage of the law following the shooting at UC Santa Barbara, Isla Vista. And the ERPO law, or GVRO here in California, enables family members and law enforcement to get guns away from someone who presents an imminent threat. And this is a really incredible tool, because very often in these types of situations, we realize after the fact that there were all these indicators, whether it's the Parkland shooting or many others that we're aware of. People knew that the individual presented a risk. There were signs. And in many cases, people, family members, friends, school officials knew that this person had guns, but there was no tool available. This is what happened in Isla Vista. There was no tool available for law enforcement to go and take the guns away from that person temporarily to prevent what happened. We now have that tool. We need to do a better job here in California and across the country in educating our communities and law enforcement about the use and availability of that tool. I think a lot of times in domestic violence situations, it's in the news all the time, where the woman who, or man, but usually woman, who is at highest risk is aware that the person who is presenting that threat possesses guns and has been presenting that imminent threat. And there hasn't been easy tools available other than just a regular DV restraining order. But now we have that. So I would just say we need to do a better job of getting guns immediately away from people who become prohibited, dealing with that backlog, which unfortunately I know is a big backlog, so it's going to take some time and effort, and then also leveraging and utilizing these restraining orders around guns that are becoming more and more effective and utilized as a way not just to prevent domestic violence and mass shootings, but also suicide. So it's a really powerful tool if it's used correctly.
In those red flag laws, there's a number of legislative efforts upstairs that I look forward to getting downstairs to expand that scope of red flag laws, which, well, we expect will be forthcoming. I expect they'll be supported overwhelmingly upstairs. Anybody else?
There's a lot of confusion about when the Real ID requirements are going to go into effect. Are those going to take effect July 1st or later? And can you explain why?
Yeah, well, if you don't have a Real ID, then you have to provide the same kind of documentation that would otherwise be required of you at the Department of Motor Vehicles. So you can have your traditional license, you just have to provide those other forms that you would otherwise provide at the DMV. But that is a requirement under this initiative and this provision. The Real ID program, as you know, has to go in effect by next October. That is a huge burden placed on DMVs all across this country. It goes without saying, we're not pleased with what's happening here in California with our Department of Motor Vehicles. As you know, we brought together a strike team. We'll be making some announcements in the next few weeks about the specific recommendations that they are making to move forward. There's one final Ernst & Young audit that we're looking forward to. We will respond to that audit in real time, and you will see a series of bold initiatives to address what is not working at the Department of Motor Vehicles to make access to the Real ID program much easier and to prepare for 2020 October.
So do you need a Real ID to purchase ammunition
Yes.
starting in October?
No, in January. In July, you will need that ID. In the absence of that ID, you will have to provide the same documentation that you otherwise would provide the Department of Motor Vehicles in order to obtain the Real ID. So you don't have to have one. You just have to provide multiple forms of identification.
Why did you think that was necessary?
It's a provision, and now I need my Attorney General to look at the legal framework, and I'll get to you the code and the statute that requires that.
Governor, you mentioned the backlog in the armed and prohibited person system with regard to enforcing and taking away weapons from people that don't legally have a right to have them.
Yep.
What's being done on your part to address that backlog?
Millions and millions of dollars of resources, more personnel, more support of the Department of Justice, and the legislature met that need, and the budget that I hope to sign this Thursday includes those resources.
Governor, on high-capacity magazines,
Yeah.
if the Ninth Circuit does not rule in your favor, what's the plan from there? Trying to take it to the Supreme Court or approaching the issue from a different angle?
Yeah, we'll have to look at whatever the decision is. Look, I'm confident the Ninth Circuit will adjudicate appropriately. Look, there have been multiple, well, I think in Sunnyvale was the first one, San Francisco, other cities. They have gone through the courts, and those bans have been validated. I was not surprised, considering, with all due respect, I'll say it, the judge in this case, who's been consistent by the decision that was forwarded. I would be very surprised if it's not overturned, however.
I just had a question. You mentioned the budget, so I just had a
Oh, come to me in 1 second, then I'll get these guys out of
Yeah, you said today that, Senator De Leon's bill had made the regulations more efficient and effective, but in 2016, your campaign called his efforts that of a self-serving sin.
Yeah, I think
Driven by petty grudges.
the fact that we're here is because we're looking forward, and what I said is absolutely true. They made revisions to basically get the two provisions to align, and I think it made it more effective, more efficient.
Let me add just one
Yeah.
thing. I just want to say, with the governor, I think what's important is that we're both passionate about public safety, about protecting lives. We agree on the vast majority of almost everything, and I think that we're here together. And I think that speaks volumes to the leadership of Governor Gavin Newsom, and we're working together to do everything within our power to protect lives and working on the same page. So I thank you for that.
No, appreciate it. And by the way, if you want to find daylight, you're going to have a hard time between the two of us. Next. On this.
Does this also cover private sales of ammunition? So like if someone just
Yeah.
go to a gun show, would they also be required?
Yeah, look, this is online. Basically, the same exact rules that currently apply for guns now apply for ammunition. We basically mirrored all of those provisions in this initiative and through the legislative efforts.
So those who bought long guns before 2014, I believe, are not in the current register. What do they have to do so they can buy them?
Yeah. And that's, yeah, so I mean, Robin, you want to talk from the Law Center's perspective? It's just something we're obviously going to have to address, but
There are a couple of little loopholes in this law. Sometimes in the drafting process, little bits and pieces don't always fit perfectly together, but we're looking at that. We're also looking at other ways in which ammunition can be skirted through this process. I wanted to mention one other thing, which is that we often get the question of, two friends or a father and a son go to a hunting range together, or go hunting together, go to a shooting range together, and they want to share ammunition, and do they then have to go through a background check? Because the way it would work, like guns, is if I wanted to sell Governor Newsom ammunition, we'd have to go through a licensed dealer to do the background check. But if we were at the shooting range and wanted to share ammunition, as long as I'm not aware that he's a prohibited person, you can share ammunition in that very limited capacity. So we have tried to build in kind of the real world realities and not make this something that's going to make life impossible for those who hunt or go to shooting ranges. But the idea is that, like guns, any transfer or sale happens through a licensed dealer, has a background check, and we make sure that the process is pretty seamless. I mean, this is an instant, really quick and easy thing. If you've bought a gun in the past, that background check is going to happen instantaneously. So it's not intended to create any difficulty for anyone.
But if I could, well, please, yeah.
Well, so the system works by, with the instant check, by cross-checking existing DOJ databases, those who own firearms, and those who are in the armed prohibited person system. In other words, they have illegal guns. If they own a firearm and not in so-called apps, then they're good to go. If they do not have a firearm registered in the system, then there's the opportunity for the individual to get a certificate for a one-time ammunition transaction that includes a background check. However, I think one of the things we'll see from this policy is that more gun owners will choose to voluntarily register the gun. In fact, there's a bill being heard in Senate Public Safety Committee today to streamline that process for voluntary registration of people's guns, which they purchase perhaps before 2014, a long gun, or before 1993, a handgun. So there are ways for a legal gun owner to use the system. I have one other point, if I may. The other important piece of this is that the ammo background check process provides an opportunity for investigating attempted ammo purchases by people who are prohibited. The city of Sacramento passed an ordinance in 2007. By 2008, 2009, they were releasing amazing data. In Sacramento, the dealers would transmit information to the Sacramento Police Department, and they would look at who was prohibited but attempted to buy ammunition. Well, there wasn't a background check. I mean, that's not starting till July, but so they're able to buy the ammunition, but they were prohibited individuals. So the Sacramento Police Department would go to those homes based on that information, and they would find lots and lots of illegal guns, including ghost guns. That's the kind of thing that could have prevented the shooting last week were in place. Unfortunately, with Sacramento, people learned to just go out of the city limits to make their ammunition purchase, which is why we need this, why we need the statewide law in terms of ammunition background checks and getting this information.
That Sacramento ordinance was so revealing. I mean, people, again, going to buy ammunition, you go, why are you buying ammunition when you don't own a gun? Only to find out they had guns in their possession illegally that weren't registered. They were able to cross-reference those databases and, as a consequence, get guns off the street. That was a small pilot. Imagine at scale our capacity to deliver in this state, and that's why we're so enthusiastic about this initiative and why I think there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. Just briefly, because I want to deal with one of the criticisms that's just made up. That somehow, folks, and Robin, if you could, just once again, I want to make this clear, and you can help amplify, because some folks don't believe politicians. Imagine that. But if you go to a gun range and you want to go skeet shooting, are you subject to a background check on those ammunition purchases?
No. In fact, as I was saying earlier, one of the amazing things about ammunition is the way in which, as you dig into the details, you find not only Can you order it online and have it delivered to your front door? No background check, no questions asked. It's an incredibly vibrant market, and yet we find oftentimes in mass shootings and other sort of horrific events that the person at issue was ordering thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds. The Aurora shooting is an example. He had 6,000 rounds of ammunition that he had ordered online. And when the family of one of the victims went after the ammunition seller saying, hey, why was there absolutely no inquiry into why this individual was ordering 6,000 rounds of ammunition over the internet, that family lost the litigation because our legal system right now doesn't provide a mechanism. There's no sense of responsibility or liability to make sure that very dangerous ammunition has a background check. And I think what's interesting about this is you'll still be able to get ammunition if it's what you want and need for hunting, sport shooting, self-defense, whatever the case may be, but it will have to go through a licensed dealer. Part of Prop 63 that I think is really important is also the fact that it increases responsibility on firearms and ammunition sellers. So it requires a background check on those individuals who are selling and running those background checks for guns and ammunition. And the reason why that's so important is because most gun dealers and now ammunition dealers are really responsible folks who follow the rules really well, but a very, very small minority supply a huge portion of the illegal market. So we want to make sure that we close those gaps, and that's part of what we tried to do in Prop 63 was to increase the amount of responsibility being held by those who are dealing in this very, very lethal product. So I think it covers a lot of bases there.
So to clarify, it has to go through a licensed dealer. Did that take effect earlier, or is that also July 1?
For ammunition sales, I believe that's just the first.
There was increments. So the background checks on some of the dealers had already gone into effect, and the background checks that are also required of some of their employees went into effect. Now it's for purchasers of the ammunition that goes into effect July 1st. So there's a number of sequencing, number of dates related to these provisions and initiatives. Forgive me for confusing you, but those provisions already went into effect.
Governor, currently a felon, somebody who's been convicted of domestic violence, it's a lifetime ban on gun ownership, correct?
Yeah, or 10 years in a number of instances. What's that?
Felony.
For
Felony lifetime, but there can be, misdemeanor. So there's 10-year provisions in some circumstances, just so there's clarification.
That there should be a lifetime ban.
Yes, I think those laws are appropriate. Yeah, you lose your right. Yes, I think those laws are appropriate. Anybody else on this topic? I can let everybody go. Yeah, I'm not leaving. I'm not sneaking out to make you angry. Don't worry. You can have at me, but let me spare them by thanking you. Thank you. I'm grateful to you for everything. Thank you, Grateful. Thank you. Thank you. All right. No, I think those are appropriate. I think the laws that are currently on the book are appropriate. Not for misdemeanors.
All right, guys, we have like 3 questions on non-gun stuff.
Whatever you want. 3, 10, whatever.
On housing and homelessness and how to allocate that spending. What are you
No dispute with me.
looking for in terms of reaching a deal on
No dispute with me. Legislature's figuring that out, and their discussions, I think, are very healthy. What the allocations will be, no disputes with our office. I'm fine with whatever. I think they'll work it out, but there's sort of mythology, some suggestion that there's an issue with our office and the legislature on allocations. I did a $275 million allocation for cities and counties. We went back and forth. On that. Listen to cities, listen to counties. COCs got involved, and when I introduced that budget, I told the legislature, you guys spend some time with your members, figure out where you are. The Senate has a version, the Assembly has a version. They're trying to figure that out. I think that's a very healthy conversation, and I'm very encouraged by that deliberation. But there's no friction, no issues with us.
You don't have a preference?
My preference, I think what's significant is the amount of money mattered to me. The allocation is less significant as long as that money is wisely spent. There's merits to the way we approached it, but they've made strong arguments that some of the COCs deserve more money. I think those arguments were compelling. I'm not caught up in that. I'm just satisfied. I'm going to be satisfied with the total amount of investment and making sure that's wisely invested. Remember, I was a city and county mayor, so I see all sides of this, and I don't mean that flippantly. I mean that quite literally. And so the legislature is, I think, making some interesting arguments, but it's, I think, more of an interesting conversation now between the Senate and the Assembly, where they land on it, and we'll be satisfied wherever they end up. Well, no, it's, yeah, I think it's in everyone's interest. If not, they'll leave me the discretion, which I'm happy to have. Well, as you guys know, because you were there in January and May, I want incentives and disincentives, and I'm not wedded on the details of that. But we've got to provide carrots and sticks. And so that's what we're looking for, and we're deep in negotiations on that. And I don't think there's any bigger issue in this state than affordability. We have a housing crisis, and we better meet it head on. This is serious stuff. The California dream, quite literally, is at risk. It's not a gross exaggeration. It's not an exaggeration at all, unless we get serious about housing in the state. This is not cute. This is not about one bill. This is about a movement. And we got to get serious about it. And if cities aren't interested in doing their part, if they're going to just thumb their nose at the state and not fulfill their obligations under the law, they need to be held accountable. That's all I'm saying. That's what we are proposing. Some mechanism to hold those that refuse to abide by the law to some account. So I don't need this. The state needs it. And to the extent I've been clear about this, I don't know I could be more clear about it. January and May, everybody said, a lot of you said, boy, that was I'm exhausted. Well, why would go back to those conversations and how much time I spent on this topic to make it clear. And so I'm working with the legislature, and we're hoping we get something done on this. If we don't, I'm not giving up. I'm going to continue to have at it, but that's an outstanding issue, and I'm looking forward to getting closure on it in the next 48 hours.
But beyond the budget, on the housing issue, beyond the budget, there's a bunch of policy stuff that the legislature killed that seems to make your
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Well, we did a lot of things that were approved. I mean, we approved a $1.75 billion allocation, $1 billion in new loans. That's unprecedented. There were legislative efforts over the last few years to increase our tax credit program that went nowhere, a loan program that went nowhere. They were successful this year. There's $250 million to deal with pre-development anxiety that a lot of cities and counties face, $500,000 on infrastructure investments that a lot of the cities and counties said they needed. Enhanced infrastructure financing, that's a big deal. Eliminating that 55% voter threshold. There were a lot of things that got through, and there's some issues that remain, and there's some efforts that we'll continue to pursue. This can't all be done overnight, and this is a multi-decade effort to get California back where it needs to be. And I just want to jumpstart that, and I think we have. But what we need is a little bit more thrust. We need some accountability, and we need some density, and we need to focus on density, encourage more density, and that's the spirit of a number of bills, SB 50, also SB 330, which has some, I think, very good components. There's efforts there with Nancy Skinner that are very positive. We're hoping to continue to see those advanced, but we're not done by any stretch of the imagination, and the next 48 hours will be revealing.
Given how closely aligned you and the legislature are, how do you feel about the
Sorry, Ashley.
process and the areas where you had
I've never had an experience this good. I mean, in my 20 years in politics. And I say that congruently. You may not believe that, but then you don't know enough about my tenure during a very challenging time as mayor during an economic downturn. That's all I know. I was a mayor of a county during an economic downturn. That was challenging. This is enlivening. These are small issues to resolve. They're important issues, but small differences, I should say, to resolve. Big issues, small differences. You asked me a question about, boy, this big disagreement on homelessness. There's no disagreement on the allocation. That would have been an issue. We're just disagreeing. We're not even disagreeing. We're just talking about where the money goes. On the housing, everybody agrees. Everyone agreed with that $1.75 billion. That's remarkable. There wasn't a dollar taken from that. Not a dollar taken from the loan programs, not a dollar taken from the tax credit programs, not a dollar taken from the $250 million, the $500 million, the enhanced infrastructure financing, all the work on, all the work that was done related to that on the language. Look at all that trailer bill language. It's profoundly important. I mean, it may not be as high profile as some things that are done here, but really important. The language, getting it to the middle class, meaning getting up to 120% of AMI, that's usually a separate legislative effort. That was already approved by the legislature. So I couldn't be more pleased. That vote on conformity, that was a huge issue. And they hit it out of the park. I mean, we got 4 Republicans on that. That was extraordinary. And that's a $1.7 billion, 1.5, I think, annualized, that goes to the poor folks that are working. What an accomplishment for this state. And this legislature delivered on that. And so these are small issues, guys. I mean, I come back to 2007 with me. You'll see issues. These are not issues. Anyway, sorry. All right, Ashley.
The Supreme Court set to decide likely this week on the citizenship question. How concerned are you that
Very.
plans on it? And also tied with the whole ICE raid idea and you all trying to inform everyone so you don't have to open the door, just keeping that guarded mentality if this question does land on there.
If you're not concerned, you're not paying attention. But I fear the damage has already been done on the census question. And that's why we're putting $187 million to supplement that question. You look back 2 years of appropriations and this year's appropriations, $187+ million. Money is already being invested in real time. No other state in America comes close to doing what California is doing to supplement the census question, regardless of what happens in the Supreme Court. As it relates to these raids, it's a golden oldie. In some ways, we're used to this. In other ways, it's still a shock to the system, depending on the prism in which you view this. I see the world from a different set of eyes. I can only imagine being in a mixed status family, how those tweets sent a shiver up my spine. And that's why people need to know their rights. When someone knocks on the door, you have the right not to answer unless they have a warrant. And I could not encourage people more to know their rights. And with this delay, this gives us the opportunity to educate more people and prepare more people for election-type fear-mongering, because that's all this is. This is ginning up the base. This is election-driven, and this is all about politics. But real people are hurt, and we're going to have those people's backs because that's who we are in California. Anybody else? Thank you all. Thank you.